you back to where this story began, the story of the Pendle Witches. The 21st of March 1612, young Alison Device was begging. She was begging for pins. She came across local peddler John Law from Halifax. She said, "Please sir, have you got any pins?" He ignored her. Knowing she had no money and knowing she was begging, he carried on walking. She said again and again, "Please sir, have you got some pins?" He ignored her again. He would not take his bag off. Then out of nowhere, this big black dog came from the trees, sat next to young Alison and said, "What do you want me to do with him?" She cursed John. The dog made John lame. He then collapsed to the ground, went numb all on the left side of his body. He was then taken to a local alehouse, where after 3 days his speech came back. He explained to local people what had happened. A letter was then sent to Abraham, John's son, told him exactly what had happened and told him to get to where he needed to be. Once Abraham arrived, John told him about everything. Abraham then went into the forest of Pendle to find young Alison, which he did. He then brought her to John. She was in bits. She saw John in a contorted state. Knowing what she'd done, felt absolutely terrible. She asked and asked for forgiveness. The thing is, John was about to forgive her if she could retract the curse, but she couldn't. Abraham then took it upon himself, said, "No, Dad, you are not forgiving her." He went and found the local sheriff of Lancashire, Roger Norwell, who plays a very big, vital part in this story. He then explained everything what had happened to him, and thus started the witch hunt and the witch trials of 1612.
Alison, along with her brother James Device and mother Elizabeth Device, were summoned to see Roger Norwell. Upon being interrogated by Roger, she admitted to cursing local peddler John Law. In this interrogation, they were also asked about another local family, the Chattocks. A warrant of arrest was sent out, and 7 members of both families were then arrested on suspicion of witchcraft and sent to Lancaster Castle, where they had to await trial under the order of Roger Norwell.
So here we are at the statue of Alice Nutter. Alice is probably one of the most famous witches out of the Pendle Witch Trials. The funny thing about Alice is though, she wasn't a beggar and she was very wealthy in the time and she owned quite a lot of land. But the thing is, Roger Norwell wasn't happy with that and there had been a dispute with the Sheriff of Lancashire. It was then decided that she was a witch and he got young Janet Device to testify against her, saying that she was actually at Malkin Tower on the Good Friday Agreement. It was also made out by Roger Norwell that she was involved in the murder of Henry Whitton, a local gentleman from here, aiding Alison Device and old Demdike for just a penny. But the thing is, again, as I mentioned, she was very wealthy for the time, so why would she do that just for a penny? She made a plea of not guilty. Here we are at the perceived site of where Malkin Tower stood. This is where the Good Friday Agreement actually happened.
Family meeting was organised on Good Friday of 1612. The meeting was seized, and it was believed it was done for witchcraft and also trying to get the accused out of prison. Roger Norwell and his men arrested 8 more people. All the accused had to walk 40 miles to Lancaster Castle to be imprisoned. While waiting to stand trial, old Demdike passed away. The conditions were really tough. Typhoid, cholera, typhus were very common in the dungeons at this time. Also sleep deprivation. So imagine having to stand trial, give your story across, while you've not slept and not seen any sunlight for months. It was also mentioned that James Device entered the prison as a very young, fit man. Once the trial started, he could barely walk and was wasting away. Sunday, the 16th of August, 2 judges arrive to Lancaster Castle to start the witch trials. The judges are Sir James Altham and Sir Edward Bromley. One by one, the accused were brought into the court, tired, filthy, terrified, and disorientated. They were also met by a jury of 12 men. Anne Whittle is the first to be brought into the courtroom. She's weak, frail, and in her 80s. She is accused of the murder of Robert Nutter. She pleaded not guilty. The death of Robert happened 20 years ago. The evidence given against her is that the family were commonly known as witches and that milk turned sour at her touch. She broke down, not knowing what to do. She said it's true. She cried, asked God for forgiveness and have mercy on her soul. She was found guilty. Next came Elizabeth Device, daughter of old Demdike. She is charged with 3 counts of murder. Elizabeth was commonly known as Squinting Lizzie, as she had an issue with one of her eyes. The clerk of the court, Thomas Potts, called it a preposterous mark of nature. The most vicious accusation came from Janet Device, her 9-year-old daughter. As Janet arrived in the court, Elizabeth began to scream. Janet turned to the judge and said, "Unto my lord judge, I cannot speak in the presence of my mother." Elizabeth was then taken out of court. Janet was then put on a table in full view of the courtroom. She told the court of how her mother is a witch and her familiar is a dog named Ball. With these powers, she on 3 occasions is guilty of murder. James Device arrived in court. He pleaded not guilty to the murders by witchcraft of Anne Townley and John Duckworth. However, the evidence presented against him by his young sister Janet, she did say she had seen her brother asking a black dog he had conjured up to help him kill Townley. This again was significant evidence to persuade the jury to find him guilty. Anne Redfern was charged with the murder of Robert Nutter's father, Christopher Nutter, to which she pleaded not guilty. Demdike's statement to Norwell did accuse Anne of making clear figures of the Nutter family. This was read out in court. Witnesses were also called to testify that Anne was a witch and was more dangerous than her mother. But right until the end, she refused to admit her guilt. And she also gave no evidence against any of the other accused. Jane Bullock and her son John Bullock, both from Newchurch in Pendle, were accused of the murder of Janet Dean. Both denied that they had attended the meeting at Malkin Tower, but it was young Janet Device identified Jane as being the one present, and John having turned the spit to roast the stolen sheep, the centrepiece of the Good Friday meeting at Malkin Tower. Both were found guilty. Catherine Hewitt was charged with the murder of Anne Folds. According to evidence given by James Device, Catherine had told the others at the meeting how she had killed a child from Cone. Janet Device also picked out Catherine from the lineup and confirmed her attendance at the Malkin Tower meeting. She was then found guilty. Alison Device, whose encounter with John Law had triggered the events leading up to the trials, was charged with causing harm by witchcraft. Alison was confronted in court with her alleged victim. She seems to have genuinely believed in her own guilt. When Law was brought into court, Alison fell to her knees. She cried and confessed. She was found guilty. Finally, we come to Alice Nutter. She had made no statement before or during her trial, except to enter a plea of not guilty. She is charged with murdering Henry Mitten by witchcraft, aiding Demdike and Elizabeth Device. The only evidence against Alice seems to have been that James Device claimed Demdike had told him of the murder. And Janet Device in her statement said that Alice had been at the Malkin Tower meeting. It is also known that many of the Nutter family were Catholics, which was illegal at the time and did result in execution and imprisonment. Alice was then found guilty.
One of the things I wanted to talk about in today's episode is this particular book called Demonology by King James I. As many people know, King James I was very superstitious, and he also believed that witches tried to sink the boat, bringing him and his wife back from their honeymoon in Denmark. In this book, it is a detailed account of how to hunt witches, demons, fairies and hauntings, and also shows the suspicious nature of people from the 1600s.
The Demonology of King James I forms one of the most intriguing and well-made texts of the Burning Times. Crafted at the end of the 16th century, it details the nature of sorcery, witches, Satan, fairies, and hauntings, simultaneously blasting witchery and papistry. King James prescribes various witch-hunting methods, classifies demons, and suggests a sole method of dealing with all form of witches, including those practicing the healing arts.
A date forever etched in history. Thursday the 20th of August 1612. The condemned were brought here to Gallows Hill, just on the outskirts of Lancaster, greeted by hundreds of people. A priest was then called, asked them to repent and pray for forgiveness. What's interesting, having lived inland their entire lives, the last view they would have seen is a magnificent Morecambe Bay.
Despite the hundreds of goading people, they would have found something quite peaceful in that final view. The condemned were then forced to climb a ladder. A noose was put around their neck. The crowd then went eerily silent as they watched the final moments of those now known as the Pendle Witches.
Here we are at what is believed to be Alice Nutter's final resting place. As you can see, many people still come down to pay their respects to Alice and the Pendle Witches. The one thing we have learned out of all of this is that these were real people who were persecuted and sadly come to a tragic end.